foremost is we are a mortgage broker. And what does that mean for you and your clients? It means choice. It means variety. It means lots of different lenders that we have relationships with, about 25 of them, and they all have products, mortgage products and programs and rates, you know, that cover everything. So some of the things we can do, I know, Moses, you were interested in FHA. We do FHA. We do conventional loans. We do jumbo loans. We do adjustable rate mortgages, fixed rate mortgages, 10, 15, 30, any number that you would like.
20.
We have VA loans, wonderful product. We'll get into that a little bit later. We do USDA for anybody who has anyone in that area. It's very geographic specific. We do investors, lots of investor programs, lots of very aggressive and very out of the box investor opportunities out there. We do, what am I missing? Interest only adjustable rate mortgages, renovation loans on both the FHA side and the Fannie side. And we have some on the investor side. We have some fix and flips and construction loans for those types of buyers as well. So anybody have any questions? I'm sorry.
No, I was just also going to say, you know, the first time home buyer, there's a program, Home Possible. Right. Actually, it doesn't have to be a first time home buyer, but low down payment loans, we have lots of options. So happy to help.
Right. I have still some buyers who think that they need 20% to put down. Mm-hmm. Please get rid of that myth in all of their minds, because you could put 3% down, 3.5%, 5%, 10%, whatever percent that you like. Of course, as you go up in value, those loan to values, and we call them loan to values, the loan versus the value of your home, or any of those type of acronyms, LTV is what we call them. Nancy has put together, and I know Rick is distributing, if he has not already, a glossary of mortgage terms that you can refer to and sound just as cool as we do.
Excuse interruption.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Excuse interruption. There are people trying to get into the meeting. Would you please allow them?
Oh, sure. I can't let them in. I think Rick has to let them in.
I'm sorry. Done.
Thank you.
If you send a text message to Rick, okay.
Yeah, we're all set. They're all set.
Okay, great. Okay. Any other questions? Do you have another question?
I'm all set. Thank you so much.
Okay. Okay. For those of you who just joined us, I'm Karen. This is Nancy.
I'm Nancy.
And we are with Westport Mortgage. I actually myself and Paul started the company this is my 25th anniversary in February. I am happy to say I love what I do, and I'm very passionate about it. And so is Nancy. We've been working together, oh God, for 20 years. It is.
January 3rd, 19 years.
Yes, yep. Nancy and I met many, many years ago, but we're still as young as could be at heart. So we were talking about being mortgage brokers, and we have lots of different products and rates of 25 different lenders. So your buyers can be assured of, getting a great deal and a great opportunity to purchase. We typically, when we go through our conversation with your buyers, it's very much like yours. You have a discussion with them or initial conversation about what they're looking for in a house, and where they want to live, and the number of bedrooms and what amenities that they want. Well, Nancy and I do the same thing, but just on the financing side. So we talk to them about what their goals are. Are they looking to stay in their home for a long time? Is this going to be their, I'm going to die in my home, is what some people tell me. And then, they're looking for fixed rate mortgages. If they say, no, this is our starter home, we'll be here for 3 years or so, and then we're going to move on, we might look at adjustable rate mortgages. For those Wall Streeters out there who are heavily bonused, we have some interest-only products that appeal to them because they have the opportunity to pay interest only on a month-to-month basis. And then when they want to throw in chunks of money to pay it down, they're able to do that, and their mortgage then gets recalculated. So that's one of the things that they like. I have others who say, we're looking for a fixer-upper, and we'd like to get some money to fix up the house. So we have those renovation loans for that. Or we're investors, and we're looking for great investment opportunities, and we may or may not document our income, and we have opportunities for both of them as well.
Or they want to close in an LLC, which is not a typical program, and not every lender offers it. A bank won't offer it. Some other lenders, but we do. So, and what we do when we talk to somebody is it's like a flow chart, and a lot of times if we have the referral from an agent, try to get a little background, because the more information we have, the more helpful we can be. And so you try to get an idea of what it is that they're looking for, so you're thinking of a certain avenue that you want to go down. And so anyway, take it away.
Every loan, no matter, regardless of whether you're looking at a $200,000 condo or a $3 million home, it's the same for items that we look at: income, assets, credit, and debt. So lenders look at income to be sure that you can take on the new mortgage payment that you're about to make. And we also, I have to caveat that with, we also have some products where you don't have to document your income. So keep that in mind. These are all just ideas and talking points that we want to share with you, so that when you talk to somebody, you say, you can say to them, I am part of a team. I have my mortgage partner, and, Karen and Nancy, we'll make it happen for you. So any of you who are even just starting out, you have a team now, and we want to be part of that team. And we've been doing that for a very long time. And then they look at assets. But by assets, I mean savings. We mean liquid, anything that can turn into liquid money, like your checking account, your savings account, your stocks, mutual funds, even your retirement accounts. A lot of my buyers and sellers will use their retirement accounts to they will borrow from them so that they can have money for a down payment on a new house. Some of them will pay it back with the proceeds from sale that they're getting from the house that they sell, and others will pay it over time. Of course, we never encourage you to take all your money from your retirement account if you're going to need that money in the next year or two. But those are all discussions that we have with our prospective buyers.
About their assets. And then gift. Can they get a gift? And a gift has to be from a family member. And I would say, Karen, I don't know about you, but like the assets are, when the rubber meets the road, sometimes people are hesitant to talk about their assets and where they come from. They show it, but where's sometimes the rest of it? Or, if they're in the, are you getting a gift? I think it's important we ask that up front, when we're in the process, just because there's ways that we have to document it. And if we get in front of it right away and either talk to them about it or say, okay, that's fine, family member, we'll walk you through that.
Right. So then we look at assets, credit. The lender believes that if you pay your current creditors on time, you will pay them on time too. And they look at debt because they want to make sure you're not taking on more than you can handle. These are the same 4 areas that you would be looking for if you were going to lend anybody any money at all, and you wanted them to pay it back. I mean, even if your kids say, well, I want to borrow $50 because I want to buy some game or whatever, but I'll pay you back with my allowance. I mean, you look to say, well, how are you going to do that? Like, what portion of your allowance are you going to take? lenders looking at what portion of your income are you going to use. So it's very, very common sense, very logical. And I find that the more that our buyers understand, the easier the process is. We love to pre-approve. And why do we love to pre-approve or pre-qualify? We do that because it's always more fun for the buyer to know how much they can spend. It's just like you and I, when we go to a grocery store or a clothing, I say a clothing store, or you go online, you know, to buy something. It's always more fun to look at those places that you know you can afford to buy from. It's never fun to look at the price tag. So I always, you know, tell people if they're looking for a Tesla and they can afford a Tesla, or if you can afford a Honda, maybe you're not looking at the Tesla or, you know, some really expensive car. It's the same thing, you know, tomatoes, you will go to your, you know, local grocery store, or you can go to a specialty store. You know, we have all of that. I feel like I'm getting off track here, but we have all of that, but it's always more fun to know that you can afford the item that you are buying. So the same goes with a house. It's not any different there. So everybody understand the income, savings, credit, and debt? Those are the basics. We do that with everyone. It's the key. It's the key to being able to move forward and hop into your car or meeting them at the house, whatever you do with your clients, but having that buyer consultation when you know that they can buy for 500 or $1 million or $1.5 million or 200,000. That's good information for you, and it's great information for them. It takes the pressure off of buying.
And I just wanted to say one more thing about, and I see we have some questions, but about credit as well. You know, I've had in the past, you know, agents come to me and say she's thinking of renting, but she has great credit. And there's two things we look for in the credit. We all look at the score, of course, that's important, but what are the minimum monthly payments that show up on the credit report? Because that is a very important factor in determining what they can afford. And when you take them out to see a house, you want to make sure that, you know, they're looking at the right house, their right price range, let's say, and they can focus on the house. Okay.
Donna, and then James.
Oh.
Donna, do you have a question?
Yes. My question is there a percentage of income that banks use that you can use of your income to go towards housing? I know I was in real estate years ago, and it was like 36% of your income could be used toward housing. Do they still do something like that? Is there a ratio or percentage that they use?
Jumbo loans will typically go to 41 to 43%. And that's gross income on salaried employees. Jumbos go to about 41, 43. Fannie and Freddie on your conventionals go to 45
or 50.
And FHA goes to 50, sometimes a little higher, depends on what the overall picture looks like. And VA sometimes goes higher than that. VA has no mortgage insurance, by the way. It's 100% financing, no mortgage insurance. I just did one for somebody, $2 million, pretty good.
Yeah, it was good. But when Donna, also, it's not just your income compared to the total housing payment. It's what's on the credit report, you know, that your total.
All of your debt.
Right.
Right.
James?
All of your debt combined with your new housing payment.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks.
James?
Yeah, thank you both. Kind of following up with Donna, it's because I was kind of wondering the same thing to provide to prospects to help them kind of evaluate, am I able right now in this market to get a loan? Do you have any like assets or like cheat sheets, I guess, that like give us that information, like the 41 to 43% for jumbo? Because that'd be just really helpful information to be able to share in letters or emails or text to kind of help generate conversation around that and get them able, and then get them into the buying process if they are.
I mean, we can share that information. I have to tell you, most of the buyers out there don't know how much money they make and don't know how to interpret the income that they have.
Or
You know,
the
there's
debts
certain
they
ways
have.
that lenders will look at certain types of income, you know, hourly income, overtime, bonus, base salary, self-employed income. If I had to share information like that, there's lots of other
Caveats.
but there's lots of items that we can share with you that you can share with them, but telling them that 41% of their income can go towards their housing, they don't know how to interpret that really, but I'm happy to give that information to you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, it'd be like, I'll figure out how to communicate it to them. But for me, then I could kind of know how to help them. It's a little scary to know most people don't know how their income works, but I guess
they don't.
So, yeah, but I think just for me, it's like helpful to know what resources there are, because this is a space that I think would be really valuable to people, especially if they are so uneducated to begin with, that they might even be scared or just immediately think, oh, I'm not able to buy when they are, and they just don't know it yet. So just trying to figure out how to lead the horse to water here.
We tell everyone to talk to us, because there's so many questions that we ask. It's like a big puzzle that we put together. It's not just income, it's not just savings, it's not just credit, it's not just debt. It's a combination of all of those items, whether or not they're US citizens, whether
like if they're hourly and they were not working for a little while, or their average hourly income, yeah. And sometimes it's confusing, but it's good to have a general idea of, you know, if you kind of know what your monthly debts are, and you know what your basic income is. It's easier for a W-2 person, but you'd be surprised, because it's not something they think about, like, oh, how much do I make that can go towards, you know, a house or a mortgage payment. And don't forget, in the mortgage payment, we have to calculate the principal and interest, which is the mortgage payment, monthly property taxes, monthly homeowners insurance. If it's a condo, your homeowners association. And if they're putting less than 20% down and not a VA, it's the MI, the mortgage insurance. That's combined and called the total housing payment. So we can run scenarios or do a what if. I often do that as well. Like, you know, talking to an agent, you know, I'll give them like a little, I'll scratch it out and we'll, you know, talk about basics and just kind of start with the basic. But I always like it if they call me, so I have an idea.
Yeah, I'll take this offline and reach out to you guys at some point here.
Yeah, please do it. Flood insurance is also part of that.
Flood.
You know, special assessments for condos. You know, there's so much that goes into calculating that. So, but yeah, definitely call one of us and we'll share that with you. And anybody else who wants anything, please put it in the chat box. Reach out to Nancy and I. We will put our information in the chat box as well, and you'll have it.
Thanks again, guys.
Moses.
So yesterday, when the question that I had to Rich was, when we write an offer, and if we go ahead and waive the inspection, right? What do you do in terms of FHA loan? Because FHA loan requires some safety issues be addressed, corrected, peeling paint, and you got to have the mechanical working in working condition. So how would you go ahead and make a strong offer with FHA if you try to not make inspection as your major contingency? Is there a way to go around that?
It just depends on what the house looks like. And I think you have to make that determination based on, on what the condition of the house is for FHA. You know, they are very concerned about health and safety, but so are
Regular
most
conventional
lenders.
loans are too.
Right. I mean, if you have a hole in the roof, no lender wants to see that, of course. Right. But with FHA, you do have to be concerned about health and safety issues, and they don't look at inspections. But if there's something noticeable that the appraiser finds, it's hard to waive that unless it can be taken care of prior to close. And typically the buyers can't do that because they don't own the property.
Okay, so during the appraisal process, you can bring that back to the seller and say, hey, these are deficient. In order for us to move forward, these have to be addressed.
Yeah,
Correct.
go ahead.
If the inspection is waived, or if inspection is not the major contingency, but the other contingency would be appraisal and making sure that everything comes out well in the appraisal process.
True. That is true. I think in certain price points right now, and at certain, say you're looking in the $300,000 range too, you are going to be finding a lot of, even up to 3 to 5 or 6, you're going to be finding a lot of first-time home buyers. A lot of first-time home buyers will take advantage of FHA for a variety of reasons. One, it could just be they haven't had enough time to build up their credit. FHA is great with not so perfect credit. They don't require a lot of reserves. It's another reason why, especially young people don't have time to build up that kind of savings, but still want to become homeowners. Debt ratios are a little bit higher with FHA. A lot of our buyers will also look at FHA when the house needs some work, because they can put down 3.5%, and then they can save the rest of their money and put it back into the house and do the renovations on their own.
You can also get 100% gift with FHA, but I think to maybe address your question a little bit more, you're not required to have an inspection. So if you look at the house, you think, it's okay, but it's really up to the appraiser to come back and say, it's fine or it's not fine, little peeling paint, and go back to the seller. And, it happens. It totally happens. And many times they'll take care of it. It's not a big cost to cure is what it's called. And it's part of the process. It's part of, what we do. Would you
So
say
guys,
so?
I'm going to take a crack at this if I could, because the question that Moses asked is actually much clearer to me now that I've heard you guys discussing it. And the question that was asked was, if you've waived an inspection contingency, how does that feather into FHA? And the real answer to that is it doesn't, because what really comes into play with FHA is, what does the appraiser see and report back? And so the inspection is the inspection.
Right.
In FHA loan, it would be more about the mortgage contingency and or an appraisal contingency where those things might pop up. So perhaps with FHA loans, one is less inclined to waive a mortgage contingency or an appraisal contingency, knowing that those things may pop up. Or if you're looking to win the house with an FHA loan, maybe you waive all that stuff anyway, like we talked about, and the buyer just has to recognize that in a situation where the appraiser goes out and finds something, they may have to figure something out with the sellers, and they don't, and if they've waived the contingencies, they have to figure something out with the seller. And maybe that's, if the appraisal comes back and says, well, there's electrical work that has to be done, perhaps the sale price has to be increased by another $1,000 to get that work done, because it has to be done prior to the close, so that the seller can go out and do that. Or there's something, nobody likes to hear me say this, but something that exists outside over here, outside of the contract, right? Although once it's noted by the appraiser, outside of the contract doesn't really work all that much, does it, ladies? Right.
Right.
So I think the main answer is inspections are inspections. With FHA, it's really more the appraisal, and perhaps the conversation, if you are in that scenario, is we don't waive the appraisal and or the mortgage contingency within FHA, just knowing that there's more things that might pop up if the appraiser happens to come back and say X, Y, and Z.
And I mean, and that's why we look, we look to you to kind of give us some feedback on whether an FHA loan works. We have other 3% down products that also work for clients on a conventional loans. So we can.
That
we
may
can
be
use
slightly less
those.
restrictive.
And they are less restrictive. I mean, FHA is always, they're very forgiving on some aspects of the credit profile of the buyer, but they're sticklers about health and safety issues. So if you look at the house and you see like a ton of peeling paint, then maybe giving up that contingency isn't good for that house. But maybe it's good for another house.
Yeah, that's good advice. It's really more scenario specific, house specific. That's good advice. With that, anybody else have any other? Go ahead, Nancy.
I know, I was just gonna say one thing. I usually ask the realtor, okay, we're doing FHA 3.5%. I'm like, and if it's a specific house, I'm like, all right, well, tell me about the house, just tell me about, how are the bones of the house from your experience looking at the house, just so we have an idea. So we already have a dialogue going on. And find it's helpful right up front. But I would never say yes or no. I'm like, this could happen, or this could be the case, or that doesn't sound like that's an issue at all.
Got it. All right, Donna, I'm going to come to you for the last question, 20-second question, 1-minute answer, and then we have to move forward. Go ahead, Donna.
Okay, it's quick. I have a question about construction loans. Is that one big lump sum, or they keep coming back and getting big chunks of money for that?
You borrow the big lump sum, but you draw on
The construction
smaller
part.
portions of it.
On it as you need it.
As you need it. It's interest only on the amount that you need as you go. And then
Thank
you
you.
end up paying for the full.
Thank you.
Awesome. Excellent questions, excellent answers. Karen and Nancy, thank you as always. Guys, if you need additional information, Karen and Nancy are both going to pop their contact information in the chat for you. So you have that as you need it. Ladies, thank you so much for your time and talents. We always appreciate you. Don't hesitate to reach out to either Karen or Nancy for more info or more conversation on something that is specific or any questions that you might have. And do say thank you to them for their time today by passing your next buyer directly to them for their loan.
Heck yeah.
Guys, have a great afternoon. We'll see you soon.
You do, and call us with any questions, any financing. Nancy and I don't list or sell homes, so we don't expect you to know how to finance them. So please, thank you.
Very good. Thanks, guys. All right, so good afternoon. Welcome back. We are going to dive right back into where we left off yesterday with the mastering the buyer consultation scripts. We went through page 1, if you remember, and just in case, okay. Did anybody have any thoughts or questions about setting the stage, that step 1 that we went through at the tail end of yesterday when you went home and kind of reread it or thought about it? Any questions you wanted to ask, any thoughts you wanted to share, any ahas you had from that first setting the stage piece? Yes, Marlene.
I'm okay, now I'm unmuted. Yeah, so since we're doing the buyer consultation script and I'm new to the company, I figured I would take a look at the buyer agreement that we have in DocuSign.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing that I noticed that was a little confusing to me is it talks about the buyer being responsible for 3%.
That's correct. And I'm going to stop you right there, Marlene, because we are going to go through that document line by line on Tuesday, right?
Oh.
So let me get there, and then we'll have. You're talking about paragraph 7,
Whatever.
C, I believe, at the top of the second page of that. We're going to go through literally line by line, so you have clarity around what that document says and why it's there, why it's built that way, and how to have a conversation around it. We're going to do that though on Tuesday.
Okay, thank you.
You are quite welcome. Barbara. So Barbara, if you're asking a question, we can't hear you.
Okay, so after I was done with the meeting, I have a New York client. We're scheduled to go see a property on this weekend.
Yes.
So I called him, I texted him actually, and let him know that it would be great to have a Zoom meeting so that we could have a buyer's consult before we do that, just so he's fully aware of everything that takes place in the process of buying a property. And so anyway, I wouldn't have made it a point to have done that. I do, if we hadn't had that class. So I'm taking it very seriously, and I'm going to include it every time.
I love it. And you know what? What I can guarantee you is that the clients will love that approach as well. It's what we have found over the last 18 months. It's been kind of the gift of, there's been a whole lot of, gee, I wish this didn't happen that went on in the last 18 to 24 months. And yet there are pieces of what we've all experienced over the last 2 years that have really been blessings in disguise. And that is one of them. Having that Zoom meeting up front so that you're ready to just go and show property on the weekend has really been one of those things that I'm not sure that we would have we would have put into play had we not been forced into it by the pandemic. So thank you, pandemic, for that one. We appreciate it, and great job, Barbara, in implementing that, because I think not only are you going to like it, I think the clients are going to like it, and it fast tracks everything and allows you to be more efficient with your time when you are out showing property. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. All right, so let us dive back into the scripts. We finished at the very bottom of the setting the stage page, which is that page 1, step 1. And I stopped just before the very bottom. I want to go back to the very bottom of the page there and read you again the second to last paragraph, which says, so let's switch gears and talk about the home that you want. I want to just take a minute and a half from a scripting perspective and outline for you what that's called, right? That one little line, let's switch gears and talk about the home you want, is called a transition statement, right? And transition, you'll start to see transition statements built into all the scripts that we work with. And they're really, really important because they allow for a pause and reflection on what you've just covered. And it signals to the person you're talking with, either a buyer or a seller, depending on the scripts that you are in, that we're moving on to something else. And here's why that's so key. If you don't use those transitional statements, and frankly, I actually prefer permission-based transitional statements. And so how you would change that line at the bottom there to be a permission-based transitional statement is to say, so James, if it's okay with you, I'd like to switch gears and talk about the home that you want, right? You just kind of ask for permission to go ahead and make the transition. So a transitional statement, without them, you run the risk of you kind of barreling forward and the potential client getting stuck on something and not moving forward with you. So now, like, you're 3 pages ahead, you think you've gone through all this information, and the client is still stuck on, so wait, what are the 3 outcomes again? I didn't really understand that. However, my experience tells me that most people won't stop and say, you know what, I don't understand that. Can you say that again? And here's why, because as human beings, what does everyone want? They want to look good and be right. And so if you're wired like most humans, you want to look good and be right in front of the agent that is having the consult with you. And so most of the time, most people won't stop and say, I don't understand that. They'll just kind of let it go, but they haven't let it go in their head. And so they're not right up on with you because you've moved ahead and they're stuck back here. So those transitional statements are really key in helping you help them to understand we're moving into a different section. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes, it
Okay,
does.
cool. And as we go through, I'll keep pointing out to you, okay, look, transitional statement, look, a transitional statement, look, a permission-based transitional statement. I just want you to understand the mechanics of how some of these scripts work. And the other reason I bring that to your attention is because there will be inevitably some of you who decide that you want to take these scripts and remove half of it and put your own stuff in and jumble it all about, right? All of which is lovely. However, they won't be as effective as what you've been given, because what you've been given in the order it's been written is done so purposefully. Hence the transition statement at the end of setting the stage, so that we then move into step number 2, the needs analysis, and there's a separation point. Make sense? So there's not only psychology behind the way these are written, there's structure behind the way these are written to help everybody move forward at the same pace. Imagine if you get to step number 5, which is close for the agreement, and they're still stuck with a question about something you said in step number 1. And so now you're asking to be hired. They're not ready to hire you because there is still a question back here. So that's why you stop at the end of each section and kind of help them transition. You'll see at the very bottom of page 1, after that transitional statement, we then kind of give them the idea of where we're headed. So Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I'm going to be asking you a lot of questions in order to develop a clear understanding of what you are looking for in your next home. That way, I won't waste your time by taking you to see properties that don't suit you. How does that sound? Remember, it's always about why it's a benefit to them. We're going to do this, and here's why it's a benefit to you. I can tell you what, if anybody is meeting with you who has ever worked with someone else, one of the #1 complaints industry-wide from buyers is, yep, my last agent took me to see all these properties that had nothing to do with what I wanted to buy. And a lot of times it's not because the agent was forcing a ranch down someone's throat that wanted a colonial. They just never bothered to ask the right questions or enough questions to really get a clear understanding of what it is the buyer was looking for. Because as we transition now into the needs analysis, what you have to remember is that going through this process, the needs analysis process, absolutely helps you understand at a deeper level what this looks like, and ultimately helps the buyer understand at a deeper level what it is they're looking for. Because I'm going to tell you probably 80% of the buyers, maybe that's even a little low, I'll stick with 80%, however, of the buyers that you sit down with don't really have a full understanding of what they're looking for and why they're looking for it, which is why this consultation, this needs analysis, is so important, because it allows you to stand out as the person who really helped them get clarity and do a deep dive. Into what it is they're looking for. All right, step number 2, the needs analysis. Look at that, we're actually on page 2, my stars. Now, what I want you to do is at the very back of your packet, there is a document called our top 5 must-haves. It's an example of a top 5 must-have list, which again is at the very back of your packet. So take that sucker out, because we're going to be referencing it while we go through the needs analysis script. Moses, you have a question?
So what is your time frame, meaning how much time do you go ahead and when you set up an appointment? Your first consultation or over the phone, you might say something, right? You might get to a point where you want to have an appointment. How much time do you let them know is going to take to complete this process, the second when they meet you at the office?
Yeah, great question. And so whether they're meeting you in person or you're having a Zoom consultation, my answer to that question on both the buy side consultation and the list side consultation has always been the same. The answer is we need to set aside between 20 and 30 minutes longer if you have questions. 20 to 30 minutes longer if you have questions, right? The reality is they almost always have some questions, so it's always a smidge longer than that. However, remember that you're not take it from the guy who has done it both ways, and like done it both ways to the extremes, right? I've had appointments that have lasted 2.5 or 3 hours, mostly on the listing side than on the buy side. But that's way too long. Like you might as well bring a loaded gun to the appointment, because at some point they want to just use it, right? No one needs to be listening to all the ways we can get your home sold for more than 40 minutes or so, right? And so it's why skill, confidence, and yet mostly a structure and these scripts are your friends, because it keeps you on track to move through the process swiftly. There's an efficiency when you understand this script and this process that doesn't take longer than 20 or 30 minutes, longer if you have questions. So that's just an answer that I give on either side, buyer or listing. How long should we set aside? Great question, 20 to 30 minutes, longer if you have questions. And then get good at fitting this consult in to 20 to 30 minutes, longer if they have questions. That doesn't mean cheat the process. It means be good enough at the process that you can be efficient with your time. Make sense? Excellent. So the needs analysis, before we dive into the structure of it, know that from the buyer's perspective, the buyer's, oh my goodness, the buyer consultation perspective, that's not what I meant to say either. Let me start that all over again. Hey, good afternoon. It's lovely to be back. No, I'm kidding. We don't have to go back that far. With regards to the buyer's consult, the needs analysis is the part where you talk the least, they talk the most, and it does take the chunk of the time that you're going to spend with them. This is where this is where the meat of this consult is, right? The setting the stage, again, as I said yesterday, it's 3 or 4 minutes. It's kind of, hey, how you doing? Here's the agenda. Here's what you can expect, and let's move forward. The needs analysis, though, that's the deep dive. And your role in the deep dive is to keep asking questions. You're the question asker, not the question answerer. The buyer spends most of this time thinking and then talking, which means you spend most of this time asking questions and listening. That's how I would describe the needs analysis. Your job, ask question, listen aggressively, and take good notes. Their job, listen to the question, think, and then answer the question. Talk, 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 talk. So let's dive into this. So Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, our goal today is to help you create your top 5 must-have list for your next home. In order to help you do that, I'd like you to start by having you describe for me the home that you are currently living in. So that's the start. You waive the top 5 must-have list. Make sure that they have a copy. If you're on Zoom, you can pop it up and share your screen. Here's what we're going to populate together and build. And we're going to start by you describing the home that you're currently living in. Why would we just start with them describing the home that they're currently living in?
Because it probably gives you a general idea of what they used to and what they will most likely recommend you to look for. Yeah, so Jonathan's got half that answer, half the answer nailed, right? That it gives you an idea of what they're coming from. It gives them an idea of what they're coming from. And generally speaking, people use what they're coming from to then figure out what they're moving to. What did I like back there that I want to see repeated in the new home? What didn't I love so much that I want to make sure I solve with the next home? Maybe I loved the fireplaces in the yard and I'd love to see that repeated, but I didn't love the size of the kitchen. So I'm looking for a larger kitchen than what I had. And so we get to have those conversations and get clarity around what that really looks like. What else? Carly.
I actually just had a question of where this sheet is because I don't see it on the mastering the buyer consultation.
It's the very last page in that PDF.
Okay. Oh, I'm on the other. Okay, found it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Moses.
So most likely their need may have changed. So you're kind of finding out what the new needs are. Even though they're comfortable with their current home, there might be something that they haven't talked to you about, but now is the time they can go ahead and actually give you an idea. At the same time, you also want to make sure that they're not asking for pie in the sky.
Yeah, so now remember, we're starting them with the home that they just went to. So the pie in the sky comes in step number 2 when we ask them to start describing where they're going to, right? And so you're 100% right. We want to be certain that they have a clear understanding about what it is they liked and what it is they didn't like, so that we can move to the next phase. Remember that here are 2 other reasons why we start this way. Number 1, oftentimes they haven't thought this through. And so when we start them with the home that they're currently in, it gives them a starting place that they're familiar with. They understand where they're coming from, and they can run through the whole, yeah, it's this, and this. Oh, and now that I mentioned that, I don't think I want that again, or I want to be sure I have that again. Right? Yes, Marion says you're framing their thinking. That's really well put. You're framing their thinking. And here's the last reason, and it's a very simple and practical one. It's easy, right? You don't want to start them off with a hard question. You want to start them off with something that they can A, look good, and B, be right? Because you want to prime the pump. You're modeling the behavior for them so they can model the behavior for themselves. So let's start them off with something that they know the right answers to. If you dive right in and say, okay, what are you looking for? I have watched buyers, when asked that question, just kind of freeze. Deer in the headlights. Colonial. Okay, well, that's a start. Like, where are we going from colonial? So if you start them with the easy question, start them with something they already know, they can prime the pump with something where they get to have the right answers. And then when you ask them the next question, great, now let's focus our efforts on describing the home that you're looking to move to or locate, right? We're going to ask them to repeat the exercise they just did, which, since they did it successfully, they now understand what you're talking about, right? Now, Marlene puts in the chat one of the things that sometimes we come up with in this scenario, right? Oh, I'll know it when I see it. Excellent. Let's paint that picture now. Right, so there are some answers that you don't accept, and that's one of them. Right, because if they'll know it when they see it, how does that help anybody? Now we're literally driving around for hours on end, staring at houses. There's no direction there. And they think that's the right path. We have to be firmer in our process to say, absolutely, I completely understand that. Let's spend a little bit of time now, though, kind of thinking that through. I'm curious, are there at least basic parameters where you want to start? I can tell you, I had somebody talk to me about a year ago saying, you know what, I'm not sure what to do. I'm working with this person who is all over the map, all over the price range, all over the whatever. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? What's her top 5 must-haves? And so I knew we were in trouble, because the answer was, well, we didn't do that. Okay, well, there's a problem right there. If you don't know the top 5 must-haves, it means you probably didn't have a buyer consult, or at least didn't do a needs analysis and pay attention enough to boil it down to a top 5 must-have list. And she said, well, part of the problem is she's looking in the whole greater Danbury area for one thing, but then she's also looking in like Branford and Madison for something completely different, and maybe Lower Fairfield County for something else. Like, okay, is she doing that all with you? Yes. Really? Why? I can offer to you that that is not a good use of your time. Right? Drive at $4 a gallon gas, pick a territory and stick with your territory. You don't need to be driving to Madison, Wisconsin. You certainly don't need to be driving to Madison, Wisconsin. And you also don't need to be driving to Madison, Connecticut, right? Well, but they only want me. No, that's a fallacy. They want the standards that you've set. Be cautious around that. I have a team member in Madison who's going to help you in Madison. My expertise is in this area of Fairfield County, and so therefore, that's where I'm going to help you focus. And so what I encourage this agent to do is call her in, sit her down and say, you know what, my apologies. I realized that in the beginning when we met, we skipped a step. And I think some of the struggle that we're having locating your property is because we skipped that step. So if it's all right, I'd like to not skip that step right now. And you just go back and do this exercise with them. It's not too late. Just wave your hand, say mea culpa. Good news, I figured out why we're struggling. It's my fault, my apologies. Let's go and do this exercise. And that way we get the clarity that we're looking for. Make sense? Yes, Marlene.
You're muted.
I had to buy a quick story. I had to buy a client several years ago. They lived in an older home out in Glen Cove, and they were looking for a second home in the Berkshires, and they only wanted something contemporary and modern. They didn't want another older home, you know, with all of what goes on with an older home. So I, sent them several listings, and I slipped in one older home. We must have gone that day, on 10 showings or 8 or 10, something like that. Every modern house they saw they didn't like. The minute they drove by this older home, they said, this is it. They wound up buying it. So it was just, sometimes people think that they want one thing and then they fall in love with something else.
Yeah, and it's, what Marlene's pointing to is she kind of gave you the short version of exactly where we're headed, right? And that is, once you have that top 5 must-have list, if you see a number of properties and you're looking at the top 5 must-have list and saying, okay, they wanted a contemporary with at least 4 bedrooms with privacy and a bunch of land and X, Y, and Z, and these 4 properties all had that and they're not interested, you don't go show them 77 other more properties just like that one. You stop and say, okay, you know what? So let's sit down, because I couldn't help but notice that your top 5 must-have list had these things on it. And we just saw 4 properties that checked off at least 4 of the 5. Each one of them checked off at least 4 of the 5 must-haves. And yet you weren't inclined to make an offer on any of the 4. And so what I'm curious about is, do we need to revisit the top 5 must-have list? Are you certain this is still accurate, right? And the mistake that some agents make, clearly not Marlene, because she was like, what about this one? And then all of a sudden there was some light bulbs, right, that went off saying, okay, well, maybe the whole contemporary thing is not really what we're looking for, right? People do make mistakes. That's why we have to monitor based on the top 5, based on the results of this exercise. We monitor their reaction to the properties that they said they wanted to see. The mistake that a lot of agents make is that they spend week after week after week after week after week after week after week showing people the same properties because that's what they told me, instead of doing it once, realizing that yeah, you know what? This is what they told me. I just showed them 4 of those and they're not so interested. We need to go back and review this process. I one time was teaching Ignite and somebody raised their hand and said, you know, I was like the agent's worst nightmare. I said, well, describe that. And he said, well, when I moved here, my agent showed me 88 homes before I bought something. Right. And it was amazing. The whole room kind of groaned like, oh my goodness, like what a horrible buyer. And I said, you know, it's interesting when you say that, I don't hear what a horrible buyer. I hear what an unskilled buyer's agent. That's what I hear. Because the lack of skill that it takes to show the same buyer 10, 20, 30, 40 properties and not recognize and help them hone in on something different in all that time, that's a lack of skill by the agent, not any kind of misstep by the buyer. That's that whole idea of I'll know it when I see it, and someone who doesn't have the skill enough to say, let me help you see something different. Let's talk this through, right? My rule of thumb was 3 or 4 properties that they said they wanted. If none of those made sense to make an offer based on the top 5 must-have list, we went and we didn't go see another property until we sat down and had another conversation. I'm curious, might there be a different style? I'm curious, are you certain these are the top 5 must-haves? Talk to me about this property that we just came from that checked the boxes. What was it about that one that didn't prompt you to make an offer? Right? We have to learn from what we've shown them and help them learn from what we've shown them. Remember, the whole process of showing property is not about finding the one. It's about eliminating all the ones that are not the one. Because at some point you're left with the one that is the one. But if you haven't helped them eliminate all the others, there's no way to narrow it down and say, yes, that one's the one. Because my experience is exactly the opposite. Most buyers don't know it when they see it. What they recognize is they know what they don't want more than what they do want. And so when you help them eliminate all of the other options, the 1 or 2 that are left end up being the winner. It's not that they found the one, it's that they found all the ones that weren't the one, and that one actually works. See what I'm saying? How the psychology behind this kind of works to your advantage if you'll pay attention to it. So we do pivot back to the script. We do pivot in the needs analysis to now have a conversation around what it is they're searching for. And again, you're going to ask questions and take good notes. You can see at the bottom there, I've given you a whole bunch of likely questions that are going to come up. Let's run through them real quick. When they say, I'd like X, you then ask a couple of questions around that. Great, can you describe what that looks like to you? Maybe they say, I'd like a, I want a colonial with an open floor plan. Great, can you describe what that looks like to you? Open floor plan to me versus open floor plan to Brett versus open floor plan to Marlene, maybe 3 very different houses. Because in our brains, we each view open floor plan differently. Maybe Marlene grew up in a house with a real massive open floor plan, like kitchen into family room into dining room, like almost one big room. And so she's seeking that out. That's what she thinks open floor plan is. But Brett's last house that she considered open floor plan was simply kitchen rolling into family room because then she could see the kids from the kitchen, right? And so our ideas about open floor plan might be different. So you ask some additional questions. Can you tell me more about that? Can you describe what that looks like to you? Can you help me be more specific about that? You just keep asking the questions and they just kind of keep talking, because as they start talking through it, they're picturing it in their head, they're walking through it kind of in their mind's eye, and they're coming up with more detail about what it is they're looking for the more you ask questions. A lot of people think that asking follow-up questions makes you sound like you don't know what you're talking about. right? I have had people say that to me. Why would I ask them to describe the open floor plan when we all know what open floor plan is? Are you sure? My experience says the exact opposite. Right? Everybody picture a dog. If I went around and asked every single person the breed of dog that they pictured, how many of us are on this call? 20? I bet you we'd have at least 15 or 18 different versions of what dog means to you. Some of you pictured your own dog. Some of you pictured the dog of your childhood. Some of you pictured Snoopy, right? So like dog means something different to everybody. Same thing with these terms that we think only mean one thing. So the art of consultation, especially in a needs analysis scenario, is to keep asking questions to keep them talking. How big is big? How small is small? Right? I need a big yard. I understand. Can you describe that for me? How big is big? Well, where I'm moving from, well, let me ask you this. Big yard. Do you think somebody moving from downtown Los Angeles has a different idea of what big yard is than someone who's moving from outside of Des Moines, Iowa?
Absolutely.
Right? They're two completely different things. You come from LA, if you have more than 25 by 25 in the backyard, like, woo, baby, look what we have. We can farm this sucker. So big and small. I did most of my my early work in Ridgefield, Connecticut. And for those of you who are unclear about what Ridgefield actually looks like, it's all in the name. We call it Ridgefield for a reason, right? Because there's no flat land here. Let me restate that. There's very little flat land in Ridgefield, like unless you live on Main Street. And so when people would come and say, oh yeah, we're looking for an acre of flat yard. Like, okay, can you describe for me why an acre of flat yard is important to you? Like, what are you going to be using it for? Because there's a version of flat that we have here. It's called Ridgefield flat. Any place else, it's called slope, right? We call it Ridgefield flat because it's not a cliff. So what are you using that for? Do you need really flat level playing fields because your kids are all soccer fanatics and they're all going to get college scholarships or go to the Olympics for soccer? Well, that's a struggle in some towns, right? That kind of flat property. We don't live on Long Island. Long Island is for the most part all flat. That's not here in a lot of our towns. So you get to ask some more of those questions, right? I love the question, why is that important to you? It allows people to kind of latch onto the idea of just not having it, but why having it works. Right? If you skip down to what is having that large kitchen actually accomplish for you? I'm curious, why is that important to you and your family? What happens if we cannot find that specific feature? That's probably my favorite question on this list. I'm curious, what happens if we cannot locate that specific feature in a house? I one time had a buyer who was coming to me from, I think, the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And apparently in the neighborhood he lived in, everybody had a 4-car garage. And so when he talked about a 4-car garage, and I asked that question, I'm curious, why is that important to you? And he said, well, I'm a collector of cars. Great, so it sounds to me like you need a certain amount of space to park additional vehicles, is that correct? Yes. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Why is that important to you? Well, because it's my hobby. Great, can you quantify that for me? How many cars are you looking to park? And so and the reason I kept asking him questions is because here's what I know, right? How many of you have a 4-car garage? Right? How many of you have more than a 2-car garage? Right? That might be 1 or 2 of you, and it's likely a 3-car garage if you live in a larger or a newer home. but most of us have 2-car garages. And so the idea of having that conversation up front, instead of waiting till we got into the car and every time we pulled into a house, he'd be disappointed because there wasn't a 4-car garage. So I asked, what happens if we cannot locate that feature? And he said, well, why are you asking me that? I said, that's a great question. It's really tough locally to find a house that comes off the bat with a 4-car garage. So I'm curious, would a 2-car garage with space for a detached additional 2-car garage make sense for you? Well, sure. Doesn't that cost more money? Well, yeah, it costs more money to have the 2-car detached garage brought in or built. Absolutely. What if it was prefab? What if we started to look for property? You can afford $600,000. The prefab 2-car garage is going to cost $40,000 installed. If they bring it in and dump it onto your property, what if we started looking in the $550,000 range with additional land? Do you think that might? So now we're having this dialogue before we set out in the car to see any property whatsoever, because the whole key to this big long dialogue is to help people understand that there is no such thing as 100% house. Anybody ever build a house from scratch in the room? Okay, if you had ever built a house from scratch, I haven't either. However, what I understand from people who have is that even if you've built a house from scratch, 6 months after you move into it, Kate, what happens 6 months after you move into it?
It settles and things change, and I don't know, and it's still in process.
Yeah, you realize 6 months later, wow, I wish I would have designed that a little bit differently. Oh man, yep. You know what? It lives a little differently than I thought in my head. I would have changed that. Or, so there is no such thing as 100% house, even when you design it and have it built. So we have to help people recognize that right up front. It's why the top 5 must-have list says right at the top of it, there's no such thing as 100% house. So let's agree that when we find a 90 to 95% house with your 5 must-haves in it, it will prompt discussion about making an offer. I'm going to come back to that statement in just half a second. So the process we're asking them to go through, they're actually practicing some sacrifice. They're practicing before they head out to look at even one house, they're practicing an understanding that they're likely not going to find a house that has everything that they want. So let's get clear about the things that are non-negotiables for you. You get 5 of them. And if you're really, really lucky, you'll find a house that has all 5 of your non-negotiables. Sometimes you have to sacrifice even one of those, depending on the market. Because there's no such thing as 100% house. For those of you who part of your process is to say, hey, you know what? When you hire me, I'm going to find you the house of your dreams. I would abandon that script as quickly as possible, because it sets you up for failure, and it sets you up to want to bang your head against the wall. Right? Because the home of someone's dreams and the home that they go through a process of designing in their head to say, this is the stuff that's important to me. These are my non-negotiables. Better to work off of a list of non-negotiables, as long as there's some reasonableness to those non-negotiables, right? We'll get to that in a second. Then I'm looking for the unicorn. Anybody ever search for the unicorn, whether it's housing or anything in your life? Like the unicorn job, the unicorn spouse, the unicorn whatever. Every time I've always ever searched for the unicorn, it has been elusive. I have never found a unicorn. Has anybody ever actually found a unicorn? I didn't think so. Make sense? Write this down on that list, because I mentioned it, but it's not on your list. The 2 Qs. I'm a huge fan of the 2 Qs. And the 2 Qs are quantify and qualify. quantify and qualify. As I'm having this discussion with Brett and she's telling me the things that are important to her, I'll ask her to quantify that. Well, I need enough beds for my whole family. Great, can you quantify that? Right, just because she's sitting there with her husband and her 1, 2, 3 children, I'm not going to guess that she needs 4 bedrooms. Maybe she needs 5. Maybe she's used to having her elder twins share a room and they wouldn't have it any other way. So she doesn't necessarily need that, right? You don't know until you ask the question. Can you quantify that for me? And then qualify is the other side of that. Can you tell me some more about that? Don't be afraid at this stage to offer some suggestions. Brett says, yeah, you know what? I absolutely need a 5-bedroom house. Excellent. Can you kind of qualify that for me? Talk to me about the use of those bedrooms. Because Brett's already said that she has her spouse and 2 children. And so I'm thinking, all right, 5 is a lot, right? Even if everybody has their own room, there's only 4 people in the family, right? Do the cats have their own room? How is that going to be used? So I'll ask her to keep telling me some more about that. Can you qualify that for me? How are those rooms going to be used? Well, 3 of them will be used as bedrooms. We like to have a guest room because my parents come in a lot from Florida and oftentimes are there for a couple of weeks at a time. So we like to have a separate guest room for them. And oh, by the way, I work at home. And so we need a 5th bedroom for my office. Ah, got it. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? I'm curious, does it have to be a 5th bedroom for your office? And Brett says, well, maybe not. What do you mean by that? Well, if we found you a 4-bedroom house with an actual den, could that work? Oh, well, yes. If we found you a 4-bedroom house with a finished lower level, could that work? And Brett says, well, maybe. If it's walkout and I don't feel like I have to sit in the dungeon all the time, yeah, that could work. Right, but we're having these conversations before we're heading out because we want clarity both for Brett herself and for me about what we're searching for. And agents who just listen to, I need a 5-bedroom colonial and don't ask any additional questions are going to drive themselves and the client crazy. Because 5-bedroom houses in a certain price range are really difficult to find. 4-bedroom houses with another area for Brett's home office are way easier to find. So if I didn't plumb down a little bit and ask some additional questions about the use of the space, we could be stuck. See how this works? Catching the drift? You kind of hearing the dialogue in your head? Great. Now, somebody mentioned it before, and so I'll address it right now. What do you do if someone's literally describing something? You know the price point. We're talking about $550,000, and the top 5 must-haves are, a brand new huge kitchen with granite, and a fancy brand new updated baths, at least 3 of them, and 5 bedrooms. And they're describing a house that in most towns and cities in Fairfield County, they're not describing something that is available. So what do you do? So what my strategy has always been is to kind of help them, allow them to run through that exercise. And then before we start to prioritize into a top 5, one of the things I used to do is to say, before we take the next step forward, I'd love to just pause a moment and jump on the MLS. And I'd like to just show you the house that at least I'm hearing you describe, and plug in some of those parameters that Brett's now given me, right? Knowing that we have that 5 to 550 price point that we're working within, and I'm plugging in these parameters and showing her that the available inventory is really more in the 7 to 750 range. And so I bring that up and I ask her some questions. So Brett, based on the things that you have said are kind of non-negotiables for you, and based on the inventory I've just brought up on the screen, what do you notice? And what Brett might say is, oh, I think you put the wrong price range in, right? Or she might say, well, what I notice is that those houses all cost a whole lot more than what I have to spend. Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm curious, where do you think we should go from there? It's kind of why I brought us here instead of continuing down that path. Would it be helpful to get acquainted with some of the properties in the town that you mentioned that are in that price range? Let's go and take a look at those. So now I'm going to bring up the actives in the 5 to 550 range. And so Brett says, okay, huh. So I'm curious, is a house in that range still something that you're aiming for? If so, what on this list might you be willing to adjust to have your top 5 must-have list match the available inventory in that price point? Or should we start taking a look at different towns in and around the town that you've identified? In Fairfield County, experience tells me that the further north or the further east we go, you do end up getting more bang for your buck. And so I'm curious, is that something we should explore? But do you see how the consultation goes? It's not me saying, like squinching up my face saying, oh my goodness, you know what, with all due respect, sister, you are living in a dreamland, right? You can't get that here for that much money. Instead, because that's me now telling Brett something. And the way Brett really understands what's going on is if she self-discovers it. So I'll push the pause button, I'll bring up the reality, and then I'll ask her a question. What do you notice about what I brought up versus what we just talked about? And if Brett doesn't immediately get to, I've described a house that's way more money, I'll just keep asking her some questions until she puts the two things together. And then I'm going to ask yet another question, right? Instead of taking over the conversation and saying, hey, you know what, no worries, we can fix this. Here's what I suggest. Because that's all about me being the smartest person in the room. And the goal is to help Brett understand that she is the smartest person in the room, that by this, the exercise of this consultation, she is going to solve the issue that she didn't realize she had, that has now come up. So I asked the question, based on that disconnect between what you've described and on the inventory we're looking at, what are your thoughts about how we solve that? Because what I'm doing by having this consult is I'm engaging Brett at a level that she's a participant in this. She doesn't get to just sit back and let me talk at her. That makes me like everybody else in our industry. Instead, I'm going to help consult her through this kind of roadblock that she's hit. And maybe she has to make a phone call. Maybe she's here on a buying trip and she has to consult somebody at home. Maybe it's Brett and her spouse and we're having this conversation together. Maybe there's a disagreement about what the next steps are. And so we spend some time allowing that disagreement to happen and consulting people through that. Well, knowing that we have to make a decision one way or the other, I'm curious, who's willing to concede on what? Would you agree? Notice that that's another question. I'm turning even statements that I want to put on the table, I'm turning into questions. Would you agree that the path forward is to either spend more or adapt your top 5 must-haves? That's still a question, right? I'm giving them the two answers. And so they get to answer, well, yes, excellent. I'm curious, which one are you willing to do? Which one makes the best sense for you and your family? And just so you realize, I'm purposely kind of going on and on here because I want you to hear all the consultative language. Consultants ask powerful questions. And then they ask more powerful questions and more powerful questions. And even when great consultants are tempted to make a statement, they add a couple of words in front of that statement and turn it into a question. Some of my favorites are, I'm curious, and then make a statement. I'm curious, how does it sound if we, right? Or would it surprise you to know that, and then make a statement? Instead of just telling someone, ask the question, would it surprise you to know that what you've just described, at least in this local municipality, may end up costing you more than your stated willingness to spend? I'm curious, what are your thoughts about how we solve that? And so the point I'm looking to make is being consultative is sometimes harder than you think. It doesn't mean it's complicated, because it's actually quite simple. It's the art of and the science of continuing to ask great questions and consulting people through to making good decisions, right? It goes right back to the conversation we had a couple of weeks ago. What's my job description? My job description is interpreting current conditions such that the client can make the best decision possible. Well, this whole process of a needs analysis is just doing that. We're helping the client interpret the conditions around what it is they're searching for. Here's what's really cool. What's cool is as you consult through by asking these great questions, by always understanding that going one level deeper about why something is important, asking great questions about what happens if we can't find that. Why is that important? How big is big? How small is small? Can you quantify that? Can you tell me some more about that? One of my favorite consultative questions is a really short phrase. You should write this down too. What else? What else them? Yeah, awesome. What else? Ah, got it. What else? Okay, good. What else? Oh, what else? What else? And just what else until they look at you and say, I don't think I have any more answers. Excellent. Let's move forward. What else is important to you then? Right? What's the next one? And so the whole process, as you're what elsing, as you're consulting, as you're getting them to just keep talking about the things that are important to them, you're writing all these things down. You're taking all the notes. And at the end of the note taking, you get to have a conversation that says, thank you so much for sharing all that with me. The next task is the tough part. Based on all the things that we just talked about, which of those belong on your top 5 must-have list? Right? You don't ask them for 5 things. You what else them until they've given you every single thing imaginable that they are out looking for. And then you ask them to prioritize. Of all those things, of the 17 things you just talked about, of the 71 things you just talked about, of the 147 things you just mentioned, if you could only have one of them, which would it be? If you could have a second one, which would that be? And we're going to do that for the top 5. Great, now we have a top 5. What I'd ask you to do is review that. Does that sound like your non-negotiables? Is there anything on the list that you want to make sure is on the top 5 must-have, on the brain dump list, right? That is missing from the top 5 must-have list that might disappoint you if you bought a house without it? Well, yeah, maybe in the fireplace, I think I have to have the fireplace. Great, I'm curious. Let's move the fireplace from this list to this list. Which of the top 5 must-haves that you identify are you going to remove to add the fireplace? Remember, the whole idea of this exercise is not just the brain dump, not just the consultative aspect of it, not just getting them to understand at a deep level what they really are looking for, but it's also to have them model the idea of sacrifice, to model the idea of you don't get to have all of the things you're looking for. You will likely get to have many of the things you're looking for, and you may have to sacrifice on some things. There is a marked difference between buyers who have been put through this exercise and when they come to the table to say, yes, I understand that this house doesn't have those two things. I'd love them. However, they're not on my top 5 must-haves. So this makes sense for us to move forward with, even though I'd love to have those, because they've already experienced and modeled for themselves the idea of sometimes we have to concede. If you save that and don't have them practice that, well, then they're stuck once they want to make an offer because they haven't practiced it. You haven't helped them understand that that's an important part of this process. That's the psychology behind the needs analysis. Does that make sense? So last thing I want to cover today, good, we're out of time, is, so give me 1.5 minutes. The idea that on the top 5 must-have form, it says, let's agree that when we find a 90 to 95% house with your top 5 must-haves, it will prompt discussion about making an offer. That's a really important point to make verbally as they're completing their top 5 must-have list. It does 2 things that are crazy important. Can you think of what they are? What 2 things that saying that up front, what does that do for you and for them? Okay, in the interest of time, I'll tell you the answer. The first thing it does is it sets the expectation of everyone's behavior. So when we're in a house and it meets their criteria, they know that what I've set out for them up front is if we're in a house and it meets your criteria, I'm going to point it out to you and I'm going to ask you about making an offer. So it's not weird to them when you do that. So many real estate agents show property and never ask the question, I'm curious, is this a house that you think you might want to purchase? That completely baffles me. It's as if the thought process is when they walk in and they know they want it, they'll wave their arms and say, this is the one, this is the one. That has not been my experience. My experience has been when I ask the question, they are far more likely to answer yes or no. Even if it's yes, I need to ask the question. Well, I think so. Excellent. Let's go back and write up the offer. If you will ask the question, you might get more answers, positive answers than you have in the past by not asking the question. Lastly, it holds you accountable because you've now said it out loud that that's what you're going to do. It holds you accountable to not hide from asking the question because you already said to them in the consult, when we get into a house that seems to fit your criteria, I'm going to ask you if you want to buy it. So then it's weird if you don't, because you told them you would, right? So it just sets proper expectations and holds everybody accountable such that you get faster positive results. All right, guys, we are out of time. This was a fast one because we only had an hour tonight. So Tuesday, we are going to finish the buyer consult and then switch very quickly over into the seller consult. Here's what's cool. The seller scripts kind of mirror the buyer scripts. So we're going to pick up where we left off. We're going to move through the next couple of pages. We don't really even work through together in the buyer consult. And I'll tell you why on Tuesday. So we're going to fast track the rest of the buyer consult because the meat and potatoes is the needs analysis. We're going to talk a little bit about value proposition and educating your buyers, and then go through the close for the appointment conversation. and then flip over into some seller conversations. We'll start with a conversation about a pre-listing package and then dive into the listing scripts and then follow up with the anatomy of a seller transaction. Based on where we are, we may, we are probably going to need to add one Tuesday. So I think we were supposed to be finished next Thursday. It is unlikely we're going to finish on time. So start looking at your calendars the following Tuesday. I know some of us are headed down to Orlando at the end of that week, but the following Tuesday, I think that will be the 15th, I think, right? So next Tuesday is the 8th. So that's 8, 9, 10. The 15th, we will likely add a class to be able to finish the rest of the content. I don't want to leave you hanging. So plan on the 15th. We'll get confirmation about that next week, but that's how the next couple of days is going to go. Carly, quick question, and then we are out.
Yes, I have a quick question. It's not really pertaining to this, and other people probably don't care. But I'm just running into a situation where my client, we've been talking to the seller for a while. The property, went off the market because there was a title issue. So I've been in contact with the seller because he really wants to buy it. And I talked to the seller the other day and he's like, yeah, we are listing it with the previous agent. So I gave her your contact, she'll be in contact with you. So I've been in contact with her. And he's like, I want to put an offer in now and make a contingent on a walkthrough, blah, blah, blah. But now I'm sitting here thinking, could I even submit an offer if it's not active yet?
Yeah, if it's an off-market transaction and there's somebody on the other side who's going to be responsible for paying commissions, you just need to have an agreement of compensation drawn up and signed by whoever is going to agree to pay. If they're listing it with a brokerage, maybe the brokerage signs, or if the seller is going to agree to pay us directly, well, then we have the seller sign. So what I would encourage you to do is, if that's the scenario and they want to move forward before it's actually on the MLS, let me know what the details are: buyer's name, seller's name, property address, and the commission that is agreed to be paid to us, and who's going to be responsible for the commission. Is it going to be the brokerage because they have a listing agreement with that seller, or is it going to be the seller? And I'll write you a quick agreement of compensation that you can get everybody to sign.
Okay. So that's what I have to do if it's not currently active.
Yep. Or if it was it on the MLS and then went off?
Yeah, it was
so,
like a year ago.
Or if they're going back to the same listing agent, have a conversation with the listing agent to say, hey, you know what, we can do this agreement of compensation thing. The fastest thing to do is for you to just put it back on the market so that the MLS now confirms my compensation. We can work it either way. It's faster if they just put it on the market. It might be better for your buyer though if it doesn't go on the market, right? Because then now there's competition, and then we just need an agreement of compensation. So send me the details offline, and I'll get that written for you.
So should I do that prior to submitting an offer?
Yes, compensation agreement first, then people and offers second. Because if you send something in, then the seller knows who the buyers are. And I grew up in the world of you don't trust anybody with your own clients, right? So I like to have those. I like to know how we're getting paid first before anybody shows any cards.
Okay, I'll have him sign it tonight because he has a procedure, but I won't send it to her.
Sounds good. Let me know how I can help. All right, guys, have a great night. See you soon.
Thank you.